Reports in Russia suggested that Prigozhin and his second-in-command Dmitry Utkin both died in the crash after travelling back from Mali, where they'd spent some time earlier this week. Now, obviously that means that there are around 50,000 Wagner soldiers who we believe to still be remaining with the group who are now without a leader. Other reports suggested that many leaders of the group, there were of course 10 people on board the plane including 3 crew, but the other 7 who weren't crew may have been all the leaders of the group, everyone in command, and all of them may now be dead. Now, we know that several Wagner-supporting Telegram channels on the social media app used by millions of people in Russia have suggested tonight that they will launch a second march on the Kremlin and that they will see to it that Putin be overturned and toppled if their leader is dead, which, as we now know, is the case. The timing of when this happened, if it is, as some people have already theorised, an inside job authorised by Vladimir Putin, is incredibly interesting. It is exactly 2 months to the day since Prigozhin's forces began their ultimately doomed march on Moscow. Now, just hours after the crash and hours after footage online showed fiery wreckage with bodies strewn throughout, Vladimir Putin was on stage commemorating the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Kursk in World War II. Whatever's gone on with Prigozhin tonight, he seems to not be bothered. Yevgeny Prigozhin's death will be one of the biggest turning points in the Russia-Ukraine war so far. What we know about Prigozhin is that he began life as a humble hot dog seller, quickly rising through the ranks and racking up rubles quicker than he could ever imagine after opening his lunchtime snack stand at a Moscow market after being released from jail for stealing in 1979. He'd later go on to found a range of restaurants after becoming part of the oligarch class in the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union. That led him to get an introduction to rising star Vladimir Putin, who only recently had become Russian president in 2001. He then became a Kremlin contractor, which allowed him access to Putin. There are photos of the two of them even dining together, with Prigozhin's meals prepared personally by some of his very best cooks put on the table. He then went silent for around 10 years, became an elusive figure and very rarely gave interviews even to the Russian press. In 2014, we know he started the feared Wagner private military group, using tactics such as paying prisoners who were already in jail to be freed from their sentences, but only on the condition that they would fight for his Wagner group. They began life in the Donbass region of Ukraine in 2014, but spread around the world, even reaching places like Belarus and Central Africa, where they were still operating until just days ago. Prigozhin refused to acknowledge the fact that he had even founded Wagner until last year, when he admitted to it and became more of a public figure in their campaigns in Ukraine and in Russia. Earlier this year, he slammed 2 of Putin's top generals over their failure to provide ammunition, even calling them some pretty harsh words that I can't repeat here. He was, by all accounts, a brutal warlord, someone who endorsed the killing of his own soldiers if they showed any sort of sympathy for Ukraine. At one point in time, he even shared a video implying that he was happy for Wagner forces to use sledgehammers on each other if they deferred from the course. He is, of course, best known for his aborted march on Moscow in June this year, after he simply had enough of Vladimir Putin. He bragged during the mutiny that his forces marched for hours virtually unopposed and eventually reached an area around 200 miles south of Moscow amid reports that Vladimir Putin had packed up in the Kremlin and fled for his countryside retreat. Eventually he reached a hastily agreed deal with Putin, the terms of which are still not actually very clear, that saw him travel to Belarus but then spend time in Africa, and for vast swathes of the last few months has been virtually off the map. There have been some various sightings and a few reported photos of him sitting around various Wagner camps in his pants, but those were never confirmed.